Hello everyone, welcome to Legal Cheat Code. I'm Swagata and today we all are present to discuss about a topic absolute liability. Absolute liability is a very important topic that is in the law of torts which falls under negligence as we all know as we have discussed in this previous video. We'll continue with that topic. So let's begin. Absolute liability. So, doctrine of absolute liability starts with a famous case of MC Mehta versus Union of India. In this case, there was a leakage of oleum gas on 4th and 6th of December 1985 from one of the units of Shriram Foods and Fertilizers Industries in the city of Delhi belonging to Delhi Cloth Mills Limited. As a consequence of the leakage, one of the advocates practicing in the Hazari court died, and several others were affected by the same. So an action was brought through the writ petition under Article 32 of the Constitution by way of public interest litigation. Public interest litigation is mostly, in common terms, the PIL. So here I have given a small slide which talks about Article 32. It is about the right to constitutional remedies. Now, in a period of 1 year, there was a second case of large-scale leakage of deadly gas in India. Due to the leakage of MIC gas from the Union Carbide plant in Bhopal, more than 3,000 people had died and lakhs of others were subjected to serious diseases of various kinds. Now, if the rule of strict liability laid down in Rylance versus Fletcher was applied to such situations, then those which had established hazardous and inherently dangerous industries in and around thickly populated area could escape the liability from the havoc caused thereby by pleading some of the exceptions that were mentioned in Rylance versus Fletcher rule. For instance, the escape of the substance was due to the act of a stranger or act of God and so on. Now, the Supreme Court took a bold decision holding that it was not bound to follow 19th century Old English law and it could evolve a rule suitable to the social and economic conditions prevailing in India at the present day. So then, it evolved the rule of absolute liability as a part of Indian law in preference to this rule of strict liability laid down in Rylance versus Fletcher. Therefore, this is how the rule of absolute liability evolved from the rule of strict liability. Now, the rule was summed up with the assertion that where an enterprise is engaged in a hazardous or inherently dangerous activity and harm results due to the escape or leakage of toxic gas, the enterprise shall be liable. Now, in case of absolute liability, unlike strict liability, this liability is not subjected to any kind of exceptions. So, there will not be any exceptions in absolute liability. The measure of the compensation in such cases must be correlated to the magnitude and capacity of the enterprise because such compensation must have a deterrent effect. The larger and more prosperous the enterprise, the greater must be the amount of compensation payable for the harm caused on account of any incident which falls under this absolute liability. So, we'll talk about certain differences between strict liability and absolute liability. Strict liability originates from England, absolute liability originates from India. The case of strict liability is Rylance versus Fletcher and the case of absolute liability is MC Mehta versus Union of India. The tort arises when some dangerous things are stored for non-natural use. This is for strict liability. And for absolute liability, the tort arises when there is leakage of any toxic gases. Strict liability is applicable to water, fumes, electrical wires, smoke, etc. Absolute liability is applicable only to poisonous gases. The place of storage can be anything, any property for strict liability. For absolute liability, the leakage must be from any industrial establishment. And the final difference is, in strict liability, there are defenses which are permissible, but in absolute liability, there is absolutely no defense. So that was all for today. If you liked my video, please give it a like, share it, and do subscribe to my channel. Keep supporting me, keep loving me, and pardon me if I've made any kind of mistake in this video. So be aware and keep supporting Legal Cheat Code.